Howdy, it's Scott. When we left off last time with L'Aventure Ambiguë, the chief's cousin mainly, but the chief's cousin, the chronic schoolmaster, had come to an uneasy agreement that they would send the children of the nobility to the French school. And so they send a letter to Samba Diallo's father, the chief's cousin, saying that they're sending his son back to him and that he's to be enrolled in the French school. And Samba Diallo's father, who in the book is called the Knight, he represents the eldership of African nobility who were not at all in support of such a decision. And he proceeds to have an argument with himself, a mental argument with himself, as to whether this decision is wise, as to whether it's a fool's errand to try to surrender to the West in this way and not really take things slow. Some of this stuff, I mean, if there's any awkwardness in the translation, you can blame me as the translator. But I'll attempt to unpack things that are unclear as I go. Some things are still unclear to me, just even in the French. But a letter had announced to the knight, again, Samba Diallo's father, that the elders of the Diallobe family, the Grand Royal, as well as the chief, had decided to send Samba Diallo back to him to be enrolled in the new school. On receiving this letter, the knight felt it as a blow to his heart. So the foreigner's victory would be total. Here were the Diallobe. Here was his own family kneeling before the brilliance of a firework. Solar in its brilliance, it's true. The midday brilliance of an exasperated civilization. The knight felt a great suffering before the irreparable decision being carried out. Under his eyes, on his own flesh. What do they not understand? All those, even in his own family, who are in such a rush that their course is suicide. Or what they do not understand is that their course is suicide, that their son is a mirage. If only he had a powerful enough stature to stand in their way, to put an end to their blind race. The firework, of course, is the technological prowess of the Western world. He thinks, for the most part, it's all show. It's devoid of substance. That what they have in their faith and in their traditions is more substantial, is more lasting. But he sees his family yielding to what to him is a temptation, what to him is an empty promise that may deliver the ability to better bind wood to wood, but won't necessarily lead to, but yes, that will strip them at the same time of some of the things that they most value. In truth, it isn't a resurgence of acceleration that the world needs. In this noontime of its search, it's a bed that it needs. A bed upon which, laid out, its soul will make a truce. For the sake of its salvation! Is there civilization outside of the balance between man and his availability? Is not the civilized man the available man, available to love his fellow man, to love God above all? I think this paragraph here reflects the notion that things are going too fast. Too much change is happening at once. The knight is fundamentally conservative. You know, Chesterton's fence. If you come across a fence in the forest, the modern post-Enlightenment man, the progressive, says, if it's not serving our purposes, if it's getting in our way, tear it down. And the knight here is a fundamental conservative who says, I don't know why it's here. Maybe we should take this slowly. It's probably here for a good reason. Yes, so he thinks civilization needs to lay down, take a chill, instead of continuing to accelerate change, accelerate technological progress. Some may argue that, I feel the knight's instinct, but even with the advent of the nuclear bomb, it's not like that slowed anything down. People didn't stop and say, let's reconsider whether our technology is leading us now. But a voice within himself would object. And I use the italics for where I interpreted one of his avatars, one of the knight's avatars that's arguing, and the other knight avatar that's arguing. So all of this is the knight's thinking. The italics is the voice who objects, the antagonist, the adversary. But a voice within him would object, within himself would object. Man is surrounded by problems that prevent this tranquility, this availability to love his fellow man, to love God above all. He is born in a forest of questions. The matter in which he participates through his body, which you hate, hassles him with a cacophony of questions to which he must give answer. I must eat. Give me food, his stomach orders. But we finally rest. Let's take a rest, will you? His members whisper to him. I'm lonely and afraid of being alone. I'm not enough. Find me someone to love, implores a voice. I'm afraid. I'm afraid. What is my country of origin? Interrogates this voice, particularly plaintive, which laments day and night. Who brought me here? Where are they taking me? We're thrown into the world, of course. This is a thrownness. I love the concept of thrownness. We're thrown into the world. You land in Jalabé country. Who am I? What's my identity? What am I here for? What's the purpose of life? This, just as much as what am I going to eat, is a pressing question for people's capacity to survive. Remember Domicide, when we read about the First Nation people in Canada who'd been moved from one reservation to a much materially better situation. But it divorced them from themselves and from their identity. And so while they had everything they needed on a material level to live better, they were suffering deeply from alienation, despair, hopelessness, addiction, and suicide. So the knight's answer, the knight's answer to this is, the man gets up and goes in search of the man. It was a little hard in French. The man gets up and goes in search of himself, perhaps. He searches his heart, perhaps. Then he isolates himself and prays. This man is at peace. The man who in all his questioning turns his sights above to God. That man is rightly ordered. He finds peace. But again, the knight objects to himself. The man must answer all of the questions. You want to ignore some of them. No, the knight objects to himself. No, I just want harmony. Pardon my formatting. No, I just want harmony. The shrillest voices try to drown out the others. I want food, I want love. Is that good? Civilization is an architecture of answers. Its perfection, like that of any dwelling, is measured by the comfort that man experiences in it, by the increase in freedom it affords him. Stop doing that. That again harkens back to the Walsh quote about domicide, that our lives, our need for these answers, are ordered by narratives and meta-narratives that we live in. Civilization provides us not just food and clothing, but a culture, a place to belong, a lineage, an idea of where I fit, what my place is in the world, what my purpose is. Civilization is an architecture of answers. You know, Gideon's born into a world knowing nothing, and his mom and I and the world around him starts to initiate him into how to process the millions of unsorted stimuli that could take his attention. We show him, through our joining our attention to his, we show him how to live and move, belong, behave, and act in the world in a meaningful way. So, civilization, that's what I take him to mean by civilization is an architecture of answers. And its perfection, the perfection of civilization, is measured by the comfort that man experiences in it, by the increase in the freedom that it affords him, and that availability to love one's fellow man, and so on. Again, the other voice. But that's precisely it. The Jalabé are not free, and you would keep it that way? No, that's not what I want. But is the slavery of man in the midst of a forest of solutions any better? In this question, I see him saying, the West has answers. Too many answers. A multiplicity of answers. there's no unity anymore. After the death of God, when we started turning to ourselves for answers, then the West starts to fragment, and we see this all around ourselves. We see our society fragmenting. There's no united narrative, but there are many people choosing from a marketplace of meanings and moralities, and yeah, it's a clown circus of of answers, technological, moral, philosophical, and otherwise. Well-being is not a function of the totality of answers, of the sum total of what we know, but of their distribution, of how the answers create the bounds and guide the movement. I mean, far and away, this has been observed, constantly, that our technological abilities have far outstripped our wisdom capacity as to how we will employ our technology. We are essentially flying forward technologically and trying to figure out the ethics and the morality and how it is going to affect and transform our societies only in hindsight, when the genie's out of the bottle, when the Pandora's box has been open. This is what the Knight sees in the West and is worried about coming to Africa. Well-being is not a function of the totality of answers, but of their distribution. They must be balanced. They must be rightly arranged. But the West is possessed, and the world is westernizing. Far from men resisting for as long as it takes to pick and choose, to assimilate and reject, one sees them, on the contrary, at all latitudes, tremble and convulse, and then transform in the space of a generation under the influence of this new gangrenous ergotism that the West is spreading. And frankly, I'm very sympathetic to his perspective. I'm watching, as part of my Wolof study, an episode at a time of a soap opera that takes place in Dakar. It's a Wolof language soap opera, and it takes place in an affluent, commercialistic, material world where status is measured by one's nearness to, or one's acquisition of, material goods. And that's not specifically Western, but the markets that are shaping and driving it are. I don't know if that connection that I just made on the fly is really that fruitful, but maybe you can tell me where I'm missing the value in it. Well, that was the Knight's personal conversation. Later, he has he has a conversation with the French schoolmaster. He comes to work sort of alongside the French schoolmaster in his own capacity. And the French schoolmaster represents, full buy-in to the West's ways. The West's dominance is well earned, and it's right. And the Knight, who's digesting this stuff from his angle, he intends to try to show the schoolmaster where the West is falling short, where it's a corrosive acid, where essentially the downsides. Yes, the scientific revolution, the philosophical Enlightenment has provided a whole lot of incredibly materially effective, technologically superior advancements, progress on one plane of existence. But the Knight intends to point out what is lost at the same time by those developments. They, Westerners, are so fascinated with the productivity of the tool that they have lost sight of the infinite immensity of the work site, of the construction site. They're so fascinated with how strong the scientific tool is, they've lost sight of the world beyond what empirical evidence can touch, beyond what our five senses have access to. They see not that the truth that they discover each day is each day more narrow. A little bit of truth every day, of course, that's necessary. But the truth to have the former? Must one give up the latter? I reflect on, looking at this quote, I reflect on the COVID pandemic. I keep making the same mistake. The COVID pandemic and how trust in the science. The science is developing at a rapid pace. And one of my courses in college, we would look at peer-reviewed scientific literature to ask, what question is it asking? What conclusions did it draw? And was the experimental design sufficient to draw that inference? Was it sufficient to answer the question? And was it sufficient to support the conclusion that they said it supported? And over again, my teacher, a great believer in science, was showing us books or papers in the scientific literature whose experimental design was not sufficient to draw the conclusions that they drew. And I think in this pandemic, a lot of people have noticed how science's view on the world is limited. Science it doesn't direct itself. Science tells us what is, not what ought to be. And so to say follow the science doesn't answer the question, okay, what is the evidence, but what ought we to do with it? What are the costs and balances? That's very much more a question of wisdom that science can't answer. It's a question for meaning, from philosophy, for religion. And so the knight here says, yeah, you learn a little bit of truth every day, and every day it's a little bit more narrow. Used to be 50 years ago that a biologist who knew everything that he could about biology knew a significant chunk of the field of biology. Now, my master's thesis was about 2 particular species of bacteria on 2 particular species of bean plants in particular conditions of 2 different soil types. I mean, that's a narrow sliver of knowledge. And if we make that our ultimate guide, if we say that that's truth, empirical, material evidence, that's truth, then eventually we'll actually find our arena for human agency and activity and meaning restricted as our grasp on the truth gets ever more individual. The rest of it has to be taken on authority from people who can digest other science for us. Yeah, must one give up the grand truth to capitulate to gain the advancements of modern science? He tells the French schoolmaster, evidence, that which we can sense with our 5 senses, evidence is a superficial quality. Your science is the triumph of the evidence, a proliferation of the surface. It makes you masters of the exterior and simultaneously exiles you there more and more. What you can't see doesn't exist. We're back to our the inside and the outside. We're back to our picture of the man who's looking out at the landscape and seeing himself. There's no there. The waterfall is not sublime. It creates sublime feelings in me. If you haven't listened to C.S. Lewis's Meditation from a Woodshed, I recommend it. I'm going to link it in the description below, where a guy who draws pictures on top of C.S. Lewis narration depicts it beautifully, but scientific worldview stands aside from something, separates human consciousness from it, looks at it, and says, here's the evidence. What I can see is what is. That's what I can work with. The knight believes that there's things beyond what you can see. There's things underneath the empirical, material stuff. And that the West is neglecting it since they've fallen in love with the tool, the scientific tool. It makes you masters of the exterior and simultaneously exiles you there more and more. What you can't see doesn't exist. The moment, I insert the present moment, like a raft, carries you across the shining face of its round disk. And you deny the abyss that surrounds you. You look at what you can see and you say, that's it. And you ignore the immense depth that escapes your human perception, that escapes the the tools of the laboratory, the tools of scientific inquiry. Every hour that passes adds a supplement of accelerant to the crucible where the world is being fused. Globalization, the technological advancements that are now spreading beyond the European powers to the rest of the world. This is the whole world is being fused together. Our destiny will be shared. Every hour that passes adds a supplement of accelerant to the crucible where the world is being fused. We did not have the same past, you and we, but we will have the same future, all of us, gangling and pathetic, we the underdeveloped, who feel awkward in a world of perfect mechanical adjustment. Woo! The underdeveloped who feel awkward in a world of perfect mechanical adjustment. Because we feel like we are not the same as the rocks and roots, and we feel there's something more to us. But then, if we limit ourselves to the empirical evidence, to the tools of science, perhaps there's no ghost in the machine. We feel out of place in this world of mechanical adjustment. If the world's one big machine, maybe I'm just one big machine, but I don't feel that way. I feel I have agency. I feel that I have a purpose, that I have a telos, I have something that I ought to be moving toward. Ought. The ought is from outside of me, not just my projection on the world. And so the knight, in many ways, he sees the meaning crisis in the West, and he laments foreseeing his son's initiation into it. That's probably a good stopping place. I'm at 22 minutes again, so that is a good stopping place. I found the knight's thinking, reflecting from a non-Western perspective on the drawbacks of the scientific revolution and Western dominance, to be wonderful articulations. And like I said, I mean, that quote, we did not have the same past, you and we, but we will have the same future, is powerful. And I don't think Samba Diallo or Sheikh Amidou Kane's experience is that of the average Fula person. This is the story of African elites trained and already initiated in Western education, but the ripples of that will be felt by the average person, either in a reaction against it or a capitulation to it. And, the knight wants people to slow down and have the foresight to pick and choose. But Samba's experience later in the book makes the point that that's not possible. So, I look forward to next time. I hope y'all are enjoying this. Write me some comments or feedback, or if you want to have a conversation about it, let me know. I would love to do that. All right. Peace be with y'all. God bless.